So, changes in the way that we can access genetic information have occurred over the last 2 to 3 years that completely alter the way we can look at biodiversity in the environment. In this case, we're talking about next generation sequencing, which is a step change in the way we access genetic information. We've entered the era of genomics, which is where the entire genetic information describing a species can be routinely accessed. Now, this is a step change from everything that we've been able to do before when looking around the environment and trying to understand what biodiversity exists, how it functions, and how human impacts are going to alter that function and the long-term consequences of those alterations. It's hard to quantify a step change, but transformative, completely and utterly. The PhD that I did, which took me 4 years and an awful lot of work and was reasonably well received at the time as being a major step, could now be done in the space, 4 years, and I was working 7 days a week around the clock. Would now take probably about 2 months, 3 months, and could be performed by an honor student, effectively speaking, with the technology. Alternatively, 5 years to the whole human genome, billions of dollars, worth a couple of thousand, and the space of 2 to 3 days if you worked hard at it. But really, the number of things you can study and the entire genome sequences that you can generate from it completely change our access to the genetic systems controlling those organisms and how they're interacting. Previously, we've been doing single genes. Now we do the whole lot, and we think of that as just a routine experiment. So it would be jumping from, Galileo's telescope to the Hubble, is a kind of comparison. At the moment, you're not seeing
Galileo's to the Hubble in 10 years?
It's actually been about 5.
Okay.
What you're not seeing yet is the Hubble's resolution and knowledge, because while the techniques have been created, our ability to use and interpret the data is nowhere near it. So we've got that, that power, but we've not yet learned how to use it. Now, currently, the approach to measure biodiversity in an area is to do an environmental impact report, where a number of observers are sent out at different times of the year, and samples of the plants, insects, animals are taken, and then a large period of comparative analysis takes place in museums or herbaria to try and identify what those specimens were. Now, due to the complexity of this work, it's very laborious. It'll take, for example, up to a year to identify a set of plants from a mining area. And what we're doing with the genetic approach is to place this whole system on a far more objective basis. What we do is use the power of next generation sequencing to pull out all of the genetic sequences in one of these complex environmental samples. Everything from the bacteria and the fungus to the invertebrates, the leaf litter material, through the plants to the animals. All this can be generated in one go, relatively quickly. You're talking on the space of a day to several days to generate all these sequences. It's actually much longer to interpret the data than it is to generate it. Now, because of this ability, we've got a completely new field and opportunities opening up in front of us. So I see those two major changes, one away from avoiding any species loss, towards a system where you're actually measuring genetic diversity and considering the impact of any proposed development in relation to how much genetic diversity will be altered. Now, one major advantage of the speed and depth of genetic resolution that will be offered by these next generation sequencing systems is that we can dramatically expand the areas we study. I think legitimately many development companies, mining particularly, are quite concerned that if we go in and do these detailed genetic analyses on a proposed mining area, we are likely to find quite unique genetic diversity that hasn't been seen before, which they are concerned may impede their ability to do mining research in this area. Now, what we would say is, sure, that is likely to be true. We will find new genetic diversity. But we have the ability with these techniques to rapidly survey surrounding areas, which are not generally done because it's only the mining companies that are paying for the survey, and actually assess how much this genetic diversity is distributed across the landscape. Where else can you find it? And so what sort of offsets can be made by the mining companies, for example? Can they, and this is what I think will be likely, put aside reservoirs of genetic diversity that equal or encompass the environment that they are proposing to develop. So that will be a major shift in how environmental impacts will be measured. And because we can actually see in fine detail the processes within these environments, we are going to have a much greater ability to mitigate the impacts of all sorts of development, not just mining, but just human activity full stop. At the moment, it's a very coarse level response. Do things survive or do they not? And can you see degradation or not? By looking right down at fine detail in the genetic diversity, actually seeing these processes taking place, we're going to have huge power to understand and therefore in some way try and repair or control the kind of impact that human activities are having. And that's going to be a major shift. While at the moment this temptation is to think, okay, there's an ability to do that, but it won't happen, I'm pretty convinced that legislation will follow. Once you do have the ability to measure something in detail, someone is going to demand that it is in fact done before a development takes place, principally if they're trying to hold it up. Now, that means the whole game is going to change. I see that this will be a standard part of legislation, and what I would do to modify concerns amongst the business community is say, look, the approaches we're talking about are incredibly fast and they are objective, and the power to look across the environment to find alternatives is going to increase significantly. The players that get involved in this technology and how legislation adapts it, I think are going to have a significant influence in controlling and having first mover advantage in the systems that will evolve to take advantage of the new technology.